Are we teaching the truth in love and telling like He? Are we holding pure motives, showing that we care? Are we teaching the truth in love?
Now, this week's lesson is entitled Teaching Disciples, Part 1. And as such, we're going to take a look at how Jesus prepared his disciples for his death on the cross and what would be expected of them once he returned to heaven. Now, our memory text for this week is well known to us, and it comes from Mark 8 and 34. When he had called the people to himself, with his disciples also, he said to them, "Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." In Sabbath's lesson, we come to this issue of identity. Now, identity can be broken down into two parts. The first being how we see ourselves, and secondly, how others see us. The fact of the matter is, people tend to see us or behave towards us based on what they believe to be true about us as a person. Maybe this is why Jesus asked the question, "Who do people think that I am?" Now, the disciples told him that some people think that you were Moses or that prophet. Some people think that, well, you were John the Baptist back from the dead. Many people thought you were Elijah, but most people wanted Jesus to be the Messiah. Now, let's be clear here. They wanted Jesus to be their version of the Messiah. Not the Messiah who would save them from their sin, but the Messiah who would not only defeat Rome, but would conquer the entire world. Now, that was a Messiah they could use. But the moment they figured out that they couldn't use Jesus, they would dispose of Jesus. And Jesus, he knew this, and he had to get his disciples ready for it. And this brings us, well, to Sunday's lesson. And here we find something unique in this story where Jesus heals a blind man, and we have to ask, why did Jesus have to touch the man twice in order to heal him? The best answer we have is that this healing was a parable or a lesson aimed directly at the disciples. Up to this point in the book of Mark, not one of the disciples saw Jesus for who he really was. Oh, they saw a rabbi, a great teacher, and maybe a great prophet. But that's all they saw, which is not so different from a lot of people today. Oh, they admit that Jesus existed, that he was a good man and a great teacher who, did good things, but that's all they see. The same was true of the disciples. They only saw part of who Jesus was until this day. And on this day, their eyes are fully opened, so much so Peter is able to declare, "I see it, you truly are the Messiah, the Son of God." If you had asked people what the perception of Peter was, they would have told you that he lived up to his name of being unstable in the same way that small, loose rocks are unstable. He was always prone to doing or saying something impulsively that would get him into trouble. And today was no different. Just the other day, he confessed and affirms that Jesus is in fact the Messiah, the Son of God. It's a great affirmation. That is, until Peter learns what it actually meant for Jesus to be the Messiah. Suffering, pain, abuse, and death on a cross. That was not Peter's idea of a Messiah, and he rebukes Jesus for even thinking that way, let alone saying it out loud. Now, in Peter's defense, how many of us would be happy if somebody we love told us that they were going to die a horrible death? In our grief, we might respond with anger or denial because what we are thinking of in that moment is how we feel at the expense of how our loved one might feel. And sometimes our responses, no matter how well-intentioned, actually hurt rather than help. That Peter's words did not provide Jesus with any comfort or affirmation. They were actually a hindrance. Jesus needed people who understood his mission and were willing to stand by him no matter the cost, even when his mission will lead him to the cross. But not only would it lead Jesus to the cross, but as the disciples in some way, shape, or form, we all have a cross to carry. At some point, we all have to die to something in order to be born again. In order to experience the new life, we have to die to the old. This is to be the mission of every fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ, to die to anything that defined us as who we were before we met Jesus. This is why Paul could say in Galatians 2:20, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who died for me and gave himself for me. According to Jesus, you gain everything when you're ready to die to everything. One of the things I love about the story in Mark chapter 9 is that God the Father took care of Jesus' every need in the same way he takes care of our every need. Yesterday, we saw that when Jesus tried to talk to the disciples about his upcoming encounter with the cross, Peter actually rebuked him. Instead of trying to console Jesus, he's trying to stop him. So what does God the Father do? He sends Moses and Elijah back to earth to console Jesus. Both Moses and Elijah understood what it meant to have people who didn't understand you and openly oppose you. People who at times would persecute you and even call for your death. They could sympathize and talk about the pain, the suffering, the abuse, and ultimately Jesus' death on the cross. They were there for emotional support. Now, the disciples are seeing all of this, and they're both amazed and terrified. And while all of this is taking place, they get a word directly from the Father himself. And the Father basically says, this is my Son, and you really need to listen to him. By the way, this was not advice. This was a command directly from the throne of God himself. When it comes to Jesus, we need to listen to him. Now, Peter, James, and John are both amazed and terrified, and they really didn't know what to say. And sometimes the best thing you can do is not say a thing and just do what God tells you to do. Now, they're walking down the mountain, and Jesus tells them not to tell anyone about what they had seen or heard until he had risen from the dead. And they kept their word. They didn't tell anyone about what happened, but they kept asking, what did he mean by rising from the dead? Jesus had been telling them all along that he was going to die, but they didn't get it. Make no wonder the Father had to command them to listen. Now, they had just come from this amazing encounter with Moses, Elijah, and God, and what they find waiting for them at the bottom of the mountain is chaos. A father whose son was possessed by a demon that the father said was trying to throw the boy into an open fire. He had brought his son to the disciples for help, and they couldn't help him. Okay, so why is Jesus so angry with the disciples? Was it because they lacked the faith to cast the demon out? Here's what I think. There are some times when the devil is stronger than we are, and in those times, we need Jesus. And I think that what angered Jesus was that the disciples had not had the faith to come to Jesus to fix what they couldn't. And they left that boy to suffer rather than to turn to Jesus. Jesus turns to the Father and basically says, if you have more than enough faith, meaning more faith than my disciples right now, anything is possible. And the Father did what the disciples should have done. He proclaimed, Lord, I believe, but you make up the difference and please help my unbelief. A prayer that Jesus, the Son of God, never refuses to answer. I have to admit, I can't even imagine what Jesus was going through that day. First, he had been making two predictions. The first prediction was that he was going to die. And the second prediction was that one of them was going to betray him. So what does his disciples decide to talk about? Which one of them was the greatest on their team? As in, who was Jesus going to promote to his right hand, so to speak? Jesus told them that one of you would betray him, and all they could think about is who's better than who? And when Jesus asked them what they'd been talking about, well, they all fall silent. Nobody wants to admit that they want to know who's going to be the top dog in the kingdom of God. They want riches. They want rewards. They want power, influence, and respect. They want to be, well, just like the Pharisees. And in their minds, there could be only one who could be God's right-hand man. All of them wanted, well, they all wanted to rule the world, including Judas. Judas had aspirations to be the greatest. His plan was simple: turn Jesus over to the authorities. Now, I'm not sure how you come to the conclusion that the person you betray would turn around and promote you. How twisted would your mind have to be to think that anyone you would betray would reward you for that betrayal? But more about that later on, well, in a future study. But right now, here's the thing. When it came to the kingdom of God, they all thought that it worked just like it did, well, here on earth. You work hard, you compete, you outperform, you rise to the top, and you do all that you can to prove that you're worthy to rule. And if you have to step over some people along the way, well, it's just a sign of how strong and capable you were. So imagine their surprise when Jesus told them that in his kingdom, you don't rule, you serve. That the whole point of leadership was to sacrifice yourself, not for personal benefit, but for the benefit of others. And that meant that you sacrifice yourself and what benefited you, well, and then you could lead. In God's kingdom, the greatest person was last in line, the last to be served, the last to eat, the last to reap the rewards. To be greatest in this kingdom, you would have to live like, well, the least according to the world standards. In other words, as a disciple of Jesus, to be great was to serve like Jesus. Now, we come to Thursday's lesson, and sometimes Jesus says something, and it makes us question the theology of what he is saying. Things like mutilating yourself or going to hell with both feet, where the fire is unquenchable. After all, the Bible actually forbids the cutting of yourself on purpose, and the doctrine of hell, well, it goes against any notion of God being just. You see what I mean about some of the things Jesus said? Okay, let's back up for a moment and let's take a look at the context. Jesus wants to stress upon his listeners the importance of taking care of people who are new to the faith, to make sure that we are never the cause of anyone losing their faith in Christ. According to Jesus, if you cause someone to lose their faith, you, my friend, will lose your salvation. Now, Jesus is going to use a literary technique known as hyperbole. It means that we intentionally and deliberately over-exaggerate. We know we're doing it, and our listening audience, well, they also know when we're doing it. And everybody knows we are doing it to make a point. Added to this, Jesus is using, well, a little humor here, especially if you are a visual person, well, like myself. Can you actually imagine you're in heaven and you know who the sinners were because they were missing an eye, a foot, or a hand? The truth is, we would all be missing body parts if that was the requirement to enter heaven. Obviously, Jesus is exaggerating to stress how important his point is. Okay, what about that part, regarding hell? Well, we have a lot of people out there who point to this verse as proof positive that Jesus believes in a very real hell. After all, the fire is unquenchable. Again, this is where the Bible study is important, especially when it comes to the meaning of words. The word that Jesus used was not hell. He never ever used that word, even though the Greeks had a word for hell. But Jesus never uses that Greek word. The word he used was Gehenna. Now, Gehenna was a very real and literal place. It was a valley just outside of Jerusalem where you took your garbage and your sewage and you burned it there. It was basically a garbage dump. What about the unquenchable fire? Well, we read That, and we think that it means a fire that cannot be put out by human effort. But that's not what that word means. It means a fire that is never put out, or a fire that just never stops burning. The fact of the matter is, Jesus wasn't advocating for a person's mutilation or for a real hell. His point was this: people matter to God. So much so that if you cause another person to stumble in their faith, there are serious consequences for that sin. A sin we are never to commit.